So the next presentation is from the Ottawa River Keeper as outlined in CMD 18H 2.15. I understand that Ms. Brown will make the presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to represent the very wide, large Ottawa River watershed, 146,000 square kilometers, of which Chalk River Nuclear Facilities is in about the middle of it. Our organization, Ottawa River Keeper, is part of an international organization of water keepers. However, we have our focus on the Ottawa River watershed. I want to thank you also for webcasting all your hearing because it was very helpful for me to listen in last night as well as this morning to what all the different interveners were saying and the questions that were being answered. And so I also want to make it clear that this is a really important issue to the people in the watershed. Ottawa River Keeper represents, we have over 10,000 followers and supporters, and there's a huge interest in what happens at this site, and of course a huge interest in protecting the river itself. And of course I make note too that the staff who live in the watershed and work at CNL also have that same interest that we're very appreciative of. In terms of my intervening today, I want to make it clear that Ottawa River Keeper, we're very involved. We are an official intervener in the environmental assessment for the near surface disposal facility. For this particular license hearing, we did not have intervener funding, so I don't have experts helping me go through all of the different aspects of it. But I felt that it was very important because our people came and said, you know, this is very connected and important, and we need to, you know, make sure that our voice is heard at this hearing. So I bring that up because when I say that I didn't have experts to go through all of the different changes in the licenses, that's quite important for a few reasons, because I have some questions, but also that, and from listening to the different interveners, I got a good feeling for CNL being very adamant that the license conditions were the same, that we haven't had many changes. When we first look at it, we were quite concerned, but we have to put our trust in the Commission and CNL that those site license conditions are similar. So I do have a few questions on those, and the first one is, it's on my intervention point 2, and the last sentence of that, in the current CRL handbook, it says that the licensee shall not produce in the course of the licensed activities or accept from outside clients waste for which there is no identified and improved treatment, storage, or disposal facilities. So I'm unclear whether that is still true for the new license. So if there's waste, for example, that becomes accepted from Chantilly or Whiteshell, and there's no disposal facility for that, is that still something that we can be assured that that will not happen? The second one is around the prohibition of controlled liquid waste released into the ground. So that is currently stated in the CRL handbook. I can't figure out if that still exists or not. I think that's of great importance. As an organization, we're really focused on the protection of water and fresh water. And so all the lenses that we bring to what happens at Chalk River Nuclear Facilities is around protecting fresh water. And the third question around the conditions is, it appears that there's this movement toward a standardization, and there's a lot of talk about the CSAs, and these are standardizations for Class 1 nuclear facilities. So a question that I have, and it's been brought up in other ways, but do these standardized license conditions take into consideration the unique site that we have at Chalk River Nuclear Lab? So the fact that we're on the Ottawa River, which provides drinking water to several million people, probably 3 million people if you count Montreal, the seismic activity. So it's unclear as we move towards these kind of standardized license conditions, do we still take into account the unique situations at Chalk River? And I also wanted to reflect on the 10-year license term that is being debated here. last night I heard a lot of arguments around the 10-year license term, and this is what I heard. I heard that a 10-year term provides certainty for business planning. I heard that it's beneficial to offset the GOCO contract so that they're not happening at the same time. And I heard that a licensing hearing is a significant effort. So those are three things that I heard loud and clear. And what was missing for me was this piece of, on, the dialogue on where's the concern for protecting the environment? Does that come into account when we look at our license terms that are being issued? How much is that considered outside of all? It seems like there's a lot of business decisions getting made, and I think that the emphasis on the priority for the environment, we heard this morning about the importance, or maybe it was last night, the importance of the priorities of the government of Canada, and I would have liked to see those brought in, because I know two important priorities of the government of Canada are a nation-to-nation approach with Indigenous peoples and the protection of Canada's fresh water. So I wonder how those government of Canada priorities are brought forward and implicated in this 10-year term for license. And then the last thing that got talked about is this piece about uncertainty, because Ottawa River Keeper, we know that a 10-year license is unprecedented. We've been seeing smaller license periods, and last night, I believe it was David Cox went on record, and he said that the past licenses have been influenced by uncertainty around the NRU safety, and that's why they've been shorter licenses. And I respectfully ask, do we not have significant uncertainty right now at this time that perhaps could be equal in parallel to what we were seeing with NRU safety? So we have new leadership, new management. We've talked about that a lot. We have this 10-year contract that's based on short-term objectives, and that got brought up as well, that right now there is this GOCO model, and they have a contract with the government, and to be honest, it's a very short-term contract in the scope of the site and the nuclear waste and the legacies. We also have uncertainty around what is going to happen with the legacy wastes at the Chalk River Nuclear Laboratory site. So we have no plans for high-level and intermediate-level waste. There's a plan on the table right now for the low-level waste. We're just in the middle of that environmental assessment, so there's great uncertainty around the waste at the site. And I think there's also uncertainty around what new waste will be generated at the site. In the 10-year plan that CNL put forward, they're talking about bringing in small modular reactors that will also be creating new waste. And so uncertainty, and then the other uncertainty, I mean, I'm sure somebody that's certain in somebody's mind, but of the $7 billion, almost $7 billion worth of liability, nuclear liability that our federal government has, I'm unsure about what portion of that is from the CNL site. That's encompassing some other sites, so it'd be interesting to know the breakdown in that liability. And especially for the people of the Ottawa River watershed, it's a little bit unsettling to know that one of Canada's largest environmental liabilities lies within their watershed. So the last thing is this concept of precautionary approach. So as I understand it from the website of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, that the Commission has to be satisfied that CNL will adequately protect the environment. And we've talked, there's been talk today about some of the things that are happening at the site. The fact that there is, and it's a lot of it is legacy waste, of course, but the riverbed, the Ottawa riverbed, is contaminated from the activities over time at the site. We have these contaminated groundwater plumes on the site that we all know about and are being monitored. And We also have this large area of wetlands and forested wetlands within the site that are fenced off to prevent access of wildlife and people because it's so contaminated. So is that what we consider adequately protecting the environment? Is a question that I have. And I think in conclusion, we would really like to recommend a precautionary approach that we take with this decision, and I think that a 5-year license would be a great place to start to showcase to Canadians that you're interested in taking a precautionary approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start?
Submission, page number 5, item number 4. What is the plan for long-term management of radioactive and other toxic waste produced at CRL legacy and into the future? Yes, CNL.
Ask Kurt Keeler to respond to that.
As we've outlined previously in the introduction, you know, the interim storage of waste will continue. It's been going on for decades at the Chalk River site of all different kinds of waste, low level, intermediate, and high. Those interim storage will continue until we successfully can implement long-term disposal options. Of course, for high-level waste, that disposal option is through the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, through the government. That's the Deep Geologic Repository, which they just recently made their first core at one of their prospective sites to check it out. And so that's where the high-level, the fuel would go to in the future. We still have to come to the Commission with project plans and get agreements for how to handle the intermediate level waste. And we've been having quite a few discussions, as you might have noticed, on potential low-level waste repository, and those will continue until we can come up with a permanent disposal option.
Thank you. Dr. Dimitri.
Just following up on the waste question. The question from the intervener that I think needs sort of a clear answer is before the site, before CNL accepts waste from outside, that they have to have conditions met to accept that waste and store it. My question with that is there a limit? Like in my business, we can hold so much iodine-131. We have a license limit for the possession, use, transport of specific radionuclides that has an upper limit. So is that the same with this, where the waste that they accept has to be stored in an approved manner? And is there a limit? And I guess more from a policy point of view, because it'll come in for another intervener, from a regulatory point of view, do we have a say or a position on where they get waste from? Is it, if it becomes like an international waste storage, is that a regulatory issue? That's a policy issue, and who makes that decision?
Haiti Tadros for the record. So I'll ask Ms. Karine Glenn in Ottawa to address the policy question that you asked with regards to do we have a say in terms of where the waste comes from?
Corinne Glenn for the record. I am the director of the Waste and Decommissioning Division at the CNSC. With respect to policy, waste owners are responsible for implementing waste solutions, and whether that's through sending the waste to a third party, like CNL, for instance, receives waste from several medical facilities in Canada, isotope producers. However, they do not receive waste from outside of Canada, and so it is at this current point limited to waste that is produced within Canada, or waste that was originally generated in Canada, such as if a manufacturer of sources will accept used sources to be returned to them, and that is consistent with the Joint Convention for the Safety of Used Nuclear Fuel and the Safe Management of Radioactive Material, which Canada is a signatory to. We do not detail through either license condition what specific isotopes they may possess. They are a Class 1 facility, in which case they have a higher limit from a specific RP or emissions provisions. There would be specific requirements that could apply. What is really important to note is that all of the waste that is currently stored on site is done so safely. CNSC staff do compliance verification on a regular basis to ensure that that continues to be the case, and that will continue to be the case until CNL develops a long-term solution for all of their waste. I'd like to point out that Mr. Keeler did highlight the role of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization's Adaptive Phased Management Project, which is Canada's long-term management solution for used nuclear fuel. And that project is currently in a siting phase and would still require approval from the CNSC to proceed. So that although there is an initiative that the government has put in place, the final details regarding that initiative are not approved. Similarly, any solution that CNL would propose for disposal facility, we need to come back to the CNSC for approval. And lastly, I'd like to point out that I touched upon the Joint Convention and that every 3 years Canada produces a report to the Joint Convention as part of their obligations as a signatory. The latest report was tabled in October of 2017. It will be posted shortly once pending French translation, but there is a summary available on the CNSC website in both French and English. In that report, it does outline all the inventories in terms of low, intermediate, and high-level waste that are currently on the Chalk River site. In addition, it also does discuss the fact that ACL, along with some other waste producers and waste owners in Canada, such as OPG, Hydro-Quebec, and New Brunswick Power, have formed a radioactive waste management industry forum, and they're working together towards developing those long-term waste management solutions. That group was created under the Canadian Nuclear Association, and then so it is an industry group. CNSC does not participate in that group, but they are working together towards finding long-term solutions for all of the waste that they own.
Can we, however, get down to the specific question here, and is what is CNL authorized to accept from Canadian waste? And I think there is a government policy on that, and I'm sure that Dr. Quinn will enlighten us with this.
Shannon Quinn for the record. The question around whether there are any constraints, really, from a policy perspective around waste and waste volumes that can be accepted at the Chalk River site from outside. Ms. Glenn rightly noted that the Chalk River site currently accepts and has accepted for many decades small volumes of waste, primarily from universities and users of isotopes and hospitals, and they continue to do so. Under the GOCO contract, there are provisions that set out that CNL can continue to accept wastes from third parties that are of the nature and the volume that they've historically done. Where they would be looking to significantly increase their volume or change the nature of the entity that would be providing the waste, they would need to come back for policy approvals. So these are the protections that are set out under contract through the GOCO arrangement.
Thank you. Question? Mr.
Yes, I'd like to thank Ms. Brown for her submission and in particular for following along on the webcast and therefore asking questions that are that can point out issues that we haven't already dealt with. So thank you for that. It was with regard to your question on the renewal conditions and the ability of the license conditions to deal with basically local anomalies or local conditions that can influence the license conditions. So maybe a question for staff: how does the license and license condition handbook deal with those kinds of things where we have, and her examples are the geology of the region and the proximity to the river. Are they picked up? How are they picked up in the license?
Jean-Luc, for the record, in the license conditions handbook, it actually lists all the facilities and activities that are encompassed by the license. So if we really look at what we're calling the unique nature of the Chalk River site, it's in fact the diversity of facilities and activities that are currently being conducted. Those are captured in the license conditions handbook. And then as part of the requirements with regards to those facilities and activities, there's safety analysis that are required for each of those facilities and activities. So it's all covered. So we have the requirements that are applicable to Class 1 requirements. We also have incorporated requirements associated with Class 2 prescribed equipment. They're all built into the license conditions handbook. So it's a complete set. So it takes into account all the facilities and activities that are currently authorized under the current license and the proposed license.
Haiti Tatters, for the record, just to be sure, we answer the question that the intervener raised on number 2 on page 4 of the intervention. There was a paragraph or a statement made from the current Chalk River Laboratories handbook that was brought reference to in terms of clarity on whether that still exists. And those words, that statement, is currently on page 41 of the proposed license condition handbook as a compliance verification criteria. So there has not been anything lost between what is currently facility specific and that statement and the current license condition handbook and what the proposed license condition handbook contains on page 41.
You raised a couple of other, the fresh water. I don't know if you missed this morning, I think we spoke a lot about fresh water and the need to protect fresh water. And in fact, there was discussion about the drinking water around the facility. So yes, there are legacy problems that the government is paying a fortune to try to fix. But in the meantime, the environment around the facility, I think, is protected. That's what we heard. So you can comment on that. The last thing about, I don't know if somebody want to comment about, you mentioned the government policy about nation to nation. On protection of the environment, I think is fundamental to the CNSC regulatory mandate. On nation to nation, I don't know if we have always, the CNSC always dealt with that particular item, so maybe you can one more time articulate what the nation-to-nation concept figures in your regulatory process.
Haiti Tatters, for the record, so I think the best placed person for that is Ms. Claire Catrice in our Policy and International and Aboriginal Affairs Group.
Hello, this is Claire Catrice. I'm Director of the Policy Aboriginal International Relations Division at the CNSC. I think it's really important to say on the record that the CNSC is a proactive regulator. We have a very robust approach to Aboriginal consultation, and our aim is to build productive relationships with the Indigenous communities, and this is what we've been working towards over the years. And I would say that we're taking very seriously where the government's position is with respect to nation relationships. And our aim is to keep working with the communities with interests and rights around the sites that we regulate towards reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to speak on the freshwater protection piece. I really do appreciate the amount of monitoring that's taking place at the site and the understanding that the staff are taking to understand the extent of the contamination, the groundwater plumes, how they're moving. That's really important, but I also want to be on the record to say that what they're doing there is not remediation. It's essentially just following the problem and making sure it doesn't get any worse. So I feel like there's a need for more of an emphasis on remediation and how they will get back to a place of no impact on fresh water. And there seems to be also sometimes I guess, a feeling that as long as regulations are being met, there's no impact on the environment. And I just wanted to be on record to say that it's not the same thing, that you can meet an environmental regulation, but you can still have an impact on the environment, which is very obvious with what we have on site right now with these contaminated groundwater plumes, with this area that's fenced off, that's contaminated. So there is impact while regulations are still being met. So I think that's just an important piece. And then I just wanted to also...
Why don't you deal with that little piece? Because I think it's important, because I understand, the way I understand CNSC and CNL, there's the other principle, which is the ALARA. It's not just meet, but improve and remediate. So somebody please help me on that one.
Haiti Tadros for the record. So I believe, again, our colleagues in the environmental protection are best placed to speak to how not only do we ensure regulatory requirements are met, but there is always an effort towards continuous improvement and cleanup in terms of what activities are going on.
Go ahead.
Mike Rinker, the Director General for Directorate of Environment and Radiation Protection. We're in agreement that there is areas around this facility for which there's contamination in which the environment is being impacted. We could start with the groundwater plumes. There was action about a decade or more ago, 15 years ago, enforcement action as well as action taken by AECL to remove the source of those groundwater plumes in a manner that would no longer allow for uncontrolled releases to groundwater. And other areas that are impacted at the Chalk River facility are related to waste that was managed in the 50s in a manner that we would not say is deemed acceptable today. CNL is now tasked with coming up with solutions to that. They are proposing programs and a project that is undergoing an environmental assessment and coming up with a more modern approach to waste management would in fact mitigate many of the situation that is occurring on site. But nevertheless, I think it is important to recognize that the environmental footprint around the Chalk River site and into the Ottawa River, the results are showing that the fish and the water still remain protective, and that while the facility is going to be going through some changes to clean up some of the areas of contamination, that is in a manner implementation of the precautionary approach that despite the fact that there's a possibility of effects, they are going to not use scientific uncertainty to justify not doing something. In fact, they're investigating and investing money to improve the situation at Chalk River.
CNL, you want to add to this?
So David Cox, for the record, we've talked a lot about our environmental monitoring program, which is extensive. We've also talked a bit about our remediation activities, which are ongoing, I think as Mr. Rinker just described. But in our proposed license period, there's a lot of additional remediation, which will have very beneficial effects on our footprint. And I'll just ask Kirk Keeler to talk a bit about the remediation activities that are coming up and are already underway. It is a part of our proposal, and we understand the benefits of remediation.
Kurt Keeler for the record. I'll touch on a few of the projects I've previously mentioned and add a few as far as remediation activities underway. Previously, I mentioned expanding the Spring B pump and treat facility to go further control the strontium 90 plume coming out of the Waste Management Area B. During the past license period, we also put a cap on Waste Management Area C. That cap has prevented further infiltration of water through that area and decreased the tritium coming out of that area as part of a protective measure. We've also completed some projects to prevent future problems. And so the completion of the fuel packaging system is one of those projects. It's recognized that some of the older standpipes or tile holes, whichever you prefer to call them, for storage of spent nuclear fuel in Waste Management Area B were becoming, were deteriorating, allowing water to enter some of those areas of fuel. And our concerns about reaction between those fuels and the water had us design the fuel packaging system to extract that fuel, put it in a more secure location, and dry it. That project's about halfway through its retrieval status of pulling fuel and putting it into the packaging system. In the upcoming period, we have some other small areas which we're going to go after in remediation. The liquid dispersal pipeline is a pipeline which in the past has leaked to the ground. That was a pipeline that actually pumped fluids up to some of the dispersal areas, which are some of the other contaminant areas on site. But our large-scale remediation, which is the goal really of CNL, is basically kind of on hold until we can come up with a disposal path to safely remediate the areas and then move those soils into a better controlled condition and go after more of the sources. And of course, that's why we're looking at a proposal for the near-surface disposal facility at this time. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I just had one clarification for Ms. Brown. In the December 11th submission, you had recommended a license renewal term of 3 years. And today, after, I guess, sitting through 2 days of submissions, have you revised that? Because I thought I heard you say 5 years in your submission, in your presentation today.
Yeah, I think I'm in the range of 3 to 5 and was curious to know why, you know, I haven't really, I've heard all the like why 10 years, but I haven't heard a why not 5 years. So that would be interesting to see 5 or less, and that would still meet the criteria of being offset by the contract and giving time. So, and again, this is, I'm telling you, not based on a thorough review and analysis, but just this piece on uncertainties that exist and I think a precautionary approach.
So you don't see any comfort from having a requirement to annually present in front of the Commission the performance of the year with all the data and all the measurement and all the achievement and allow for some sort of intervention from anybody who wants to intervene. You don't see any comfort in that?
No, I don't. I think it's harder to move backwards than to move incrementally forwards.
Thank you. Any other question? Any final thought?
Well, I just have one thing that has not been addressed that I was really wanting to have on the record was this other license of the prohibition of controlled liquid waste releases into the ground, and I still have no idea if that is indeed included in the new license requirements.
Anybody, CNL or CNSC, who is first to be able to come with an answer?
I'm just trying to find it. One thing I can say unequivocally, if it's not there, it certainly will be there. We don't authorize the pumping of liquids directly into the ground. It's not an authorized activity. I can't find it in front of me right now. We definitely will check to make sure that in the license conditions handbook, there's clarity on that.
CNL?
Yeah, I'll just point out one thing perhaps, and that's under the regulations for Class 1 nuclear facilities, and I'll just read you a section of that. The proposed location of points of release, the proposed maximum quantities and concentrations, and the anticipated volume and flow rate of release of nuclear substances and hazardous substances into the environment, including their physical, chemical, and radiological characteristics. And it goes on, but this is covered under the general provisions of a Class 1 nuclear facility regulations. So it doesn't specifically prohibit any kind of release, but it puts it under regulatory control. You need to have that, and those conditions met. So that's what I would contribute to this.
But it's not specifically in the LCH. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the Class 1 nuclear facility regulations govern us.
I know, but it's not furtherly described. It just, you have to go to the regs. Okay, look, I think you've said, I think I've heard that as a result of this hearing, at the conclusion of this hearing, I think I heard CNSC saying that you have to go back to take a look at your LCH, and if there's any idea or any comment that was raised throughout those things, you will take a look again to see if you need to modify the proposed LCH. Did I get this right?
Haiti Tatters, for the record, that is correct.
Thank you. Any final thought?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. The next